Well, uncharted territory for Kenya and indeed Africa too. And of course, in the next few days, the country will be seeking some clarity from the Electoral Commission and the country's courts. But just how did we get here? CGTN's Kiyo takes us back to August 8th.
It was a fierce political contest from the word go. 8 candidates were on the ballot, but in reality, as with the 2013 election, the battle was between these two, the incumbent Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga, making his 4th attempt at the presidency. August 8th, the enthusiasm among Kenyan voters quite evident, with long queues across the country. For 3 days, Kenyatta maintains a 10% lead in the provisional results relayed at the National Tallying Center.
I wish to declare Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta as President-elect.
3 days later, August 11th, IEBC, that's the Electoral Commission, declares Kenyatta winner by 54 to Odinga's 45%. Odinga immediately disputes the results as protests break out in opposition strongholds. A 9-year-old girl among the first casualties. August 19th, at the 11th hour, the opposition submits tens of thousands of documents as it files a petition at the Supreme Court. It claims the vote was rigged. On the 1st of September, Odinga would score a victory in what would be an unprecedented decision not just in Kenya but Africa, as the Supreme Court nullifies the election, citing irregularities and orders a new vote within 60 days. The reaction was immediate, with the president describing the Supreme Court judges as a bunch of crooks. On September 4th, the Electoral Commission announces the new vote will be on the 17th of October, but later moves it to the 26th, which is 5 days short of the 60-day deadline allowed by the Constitution. The Commission says it needs time to prepare. There have been signs Odinga is not actually keen for a rerun. While Kenyatta has been traversing the country on the campaign trail, Odinga's side has barely held any kind of rallies. And over the weekend, he announced he would be traveling to the UK and US for 4 weeks.
By NASA vacating his presidential candidature.
On Tuesday, October 10th, Odinga withdraws, claiming the Electoral Commission has not reformed. Kenyatta says he's ready to proceed with a rerun. And then on October 11th, the High Court rules that the 6 other candidates from August 8th should also be on the rerun ballot. Kiyo, CGTN.
Well, let's try and unpack some of the developments over the last 24 hours or so. Joining me in studio is Dr. Alex Awiti. He is the director of the East African Institute at Aga Khan University here in Nairobi. Dr. Awiti, thanks for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Well, indeed, Kenya is experiencing very unfamiliar territory, both legally and politically. In your view, what are the underlying issues?
I guess it's the structure of our politics, which is a zero-sum game. It leaves no room for losers. The victor takes it all. We try to kind of diffuse some of these problematic elements of that political competition process through devolution, basically trying to create several centers of power, but it hasn't diffused that energy that attends political competition at the presidential level. And historically, incumbents have somewhat kind of gamed the system, and everybody else who's in opposition is always suspicious of the intentions of the incumbent. And that kind of raises the political temperatures every time. And if you look at the country historically, in 1992, in 1997, the political competition was extremely intense with all kinds of violence and repression from the Moi regime. In 2003, there was not an incumbent defending their seat, and 2002 was very peaceful. 2007, we were visited again by the same amount of chaos. 2013 passed on relatively smoothly, and then you see this other curse now just returning.
And given the zero-sum game context that you've described, where does one look for solutions now? Is it in the political space, or is it perhaps through legal institutions?
Well, one of the things that we tried to kind of build in the Constitution was this 50% plus threshold for the presidency, hoping that then that would create a sense of a shared and believable legitimacy. at the presidential level. But the 2013 was contested, as you saw, and the margin was very slim. This time, Uhuru Kenyatta opened up a much wider margin, and then we saw the chaos that attended that in terms of the Supreme Court ruling that basically nullified that vote, and then asking for elections to be held in 6 days. And then we've seen all of the conversations around institutional reform. So I think where we should look for solutions is really in strengthening institutions. Their capability in terms of human capacity, but also the fact that respect of institutions as vital powers within a democratic process, especially parliamentary, the executive, and the judiciary. That balance of power is fundamentally critical. But also the institutions of the state institutions that are being created, including things like the IEBC, must be respected and must be given the opportunity to execute their full mandate. Now, we have to be both constitutional and institutional in the way that we approach our democracy. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult to resolve these kinds of differences and conflict that must attend any democratic competitive process.
And given that there has been so many changes in just the past 24 hours, and people looking for answers through the Electoral Commission, through the courts, from politicians, do you think there's still room at this point for some of these key actors to sit down and engage, some form of dialogue to bring about a resolution?
I think we saw a moment of constitutional triumph in the ruling of the Supreme Court. They basically did something that is unprecedented even on this continent. What we didn't do was to manage the political processes around dealing with that Supreme Court decision, which was a landmark. And I think that's where we must still go back to. The courts will pronounce themselves on this. If this matter is taken before the Chief Justice, he will provide the constitutional interpretation of Raila Odinga's withdrawal from this process. The political implications of that, and as with the political implications of the Supreme Court ruling, is what we haven't been able to deal with. So the question really is, how do you get the political actors, the most consequential ones, Mr. Uhuru Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga, to basically boil down the hubris and the arrogance that has attended most of their public pronouncement, to put the country first and actually begin a politically negotiated process that will then get us off of this. We did that in 2008. So we have a precedence of being able to sit down, put aside our differences, and put the country first. Now, this calls for that kind of leadership. It calls for that kind of statesmanship, not this brinkmanship that we're seeing from these two political players.
And having said that, you know, you talk about this failure to manage political consequences. Now we're seeing Raila Odinga calling for daily demonstrations from next week. What will this do to the country, not only economically, but certainly in terms of the mood and possible tensions?
So I have stated before, the economy is comatose. Investors are running scared. All new investments have been frozen. Right now, we're still going to see these things translate at the household level with layoffs and businesses that cannot translate into profits. And therefore, even the mom and pop shop are going to close down. It is terrible for the economy, and it is going to be very difficult to crawl out of this situation. So Raila Odinga and Mr. Kenyatta should just calm down and have a conversation. I think there's a greater good for the country to be gained out of a negotiated political process. To bind the wounds of the country is going to take much more courage and leadership than these two gentlemen have demonstrated. And the people around them must actually now begin to rein them back in and say, look, you're going to throw the country off the cliff. And I just don't know at what point, because the Supreme Court can only do what it does. The political process and the responsibility to stitch the country together in a believable political consensus is really the responsibility of the political leadership across these two fundamentally problematic divides.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. Dr. Alex Awiti, live here in studio with us on the uncertainty that lies ahead for Kenya.